All right, welcome to my session. My name is Sebastian Daschner. I'm a freelancer, consultant, developer, architect, whatever you call it, based in Munich, Germany. I'm doing Java, obviously. So I'm a so-called Java champion. You can Google that, whatever that means. I'm also in the JCP and in the JAX-ORES expert group for the Java EE8, for JSR 370. And yeah, I'm a regular conference speaker every now and then. More slides to myself. I'm organizing workshops and trainings, both in Munich and in the beautiful city of Oslo. So these workshops for the first round are about JAX-ORES with hypermedia REST with Java EE, furthermore continuous integration and continuous delivery pipelines, about testing and all that stuff. These two are in Munich and Oslo. You can check out my website if you want to. And these can also be done virtually on demand. Then just feel free to contact me. Yeah, and actually these are all my slides, because slides are boring and we do want to have like interesting stuff, right? So lightweight, Java EE, right? It is today. So who of you thinks Java EE is somewhat heavyweight? Hands up. Oh, wow, that's a lot. Okay, just to get an impression, tell me some things which you think are too bloated, are too heavyweight when using Java EE. Just shout it out. What are these? What? Sorry? Beans, like in general, all kind of beans. Okay, beans, what else? Runtime, like application servers. Okay, application servers. What else? Stuff like XML, something like that. All right, so let's see what we do with that, if that's true. In general, if you have any questions during my talk, just feel free to ask and just be rude and interrupt me and ask questions. That's good. I don't have any stickers or giveaways to you, unfortunately, but still, questions are welcome. So what will I do now? I will implement a Java EE application using Maven and Java EE7 plus Java 8 as a runtime, and all kind of runtimes as application servers and so on and so forth. And during I will develop that, you can ask questions and I will explain why I'm doing things like I'm doing them. And so let's create a project, a Java EE7 Maven project. Let's call it Java 1 as we're here, obviously. This is just a script to create a project. Before, in the past, I used Maven archetypes, but actually Maven archetypes are kind of slow sometimes. So let's show you. This is just what I created from a bash script. It creates a POM with a beans XML, a couple of folders, and that's actually it. Because for the simplest possible Maven Java EE project, you don't need much more, and this is actually faster. Otherwise, it would here connect to a network and all that stuff using Maven. We don't want that. And I use IntelliJ to open and access it. So it's simple, so I can type it right away. All the things I'm showing you, I'm really doing from scratch, so there's no magic and prepared anything here. If you have any questions, just ask. So this is, who of you has been using Maven? Hands up. Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. That's good. This is my Maven POM file. And that's the interesting part here. That's all you need, I claim, at least on the runtime side. So not for tests, you need a little bit more, but that's all that should be shipped, or actually not shipped, as it is provided to your application. And you don't need much more. Or actually, you don't need more if you use Java EE7. And I'll tell you why during my talk. And that's actually it. And you don't need more for Maven configuration, because it comes with convention over configuration. If you do much more, like a couple of plugins and stuff, I would ask why. And I claim in the mostly you don't need them and can delete them. And you can delete all kind of XML, so please do so. If you use something like project URL, developers, ABC, just get rid of that. Nobody wants to know that. Um, anyway, I created just the JAX-RS configuration here to bootstrap it, but that's actually boring, so I will close it right away. And that's it. That's really empty project, just a default Maven structure. And if you use Maven, you know what I'm talking about. So if you attended the keynote, and especially when I was walking around, I heard even something about the Oracle Open World keynote from Larry. You probably heard the word cloud, right? So let's do cloud, as this is a thing, apparently. Let's, do some clouds here. Although the weather is quite nice in San Francisco, but apparently it's quite cloudy. And let's do a clouds resource. So what I'm showing you is a Java EE application which does some cloud stuff. And who of you has used JAX-RS for RESTful services? Okay, not everybody. If you have any questions what I'm doing, please feel free to ask. I'm in the EG, so I probably should know. This is an add path. This annotation tells you that this is a JAX-RS resource, and this means it will expose stuff over HTTP. So all the methods, which I'm now writing, like add get, will be available under that resource, under that URL. Something like here, your server's URL /resources. That's how it works, /clouds here, because that's the resource and they can have sub-resources. And this will be a get method. So when you call HTTP get, then this will be available. And now we can return our clouds here. So what I'm showing you is kind of basic, you might argue, and this is on purpose because during my talk I will show you how to connect various technologies and functionality in a most easy way without, and that's the part, without any configuration. So you heard XML before, you don't need XML. The only thing, oh, I forgot to show you one thing. Fair enough. That's the only XML which will be there on the server. That's a Beans XML, and you actually could even get rid of this. The only interesting thing here is you need that to inject beans which are not annotated. If you want to annotate them and get rid of this, then you could also delete that file and just annotate all of the beans, and then you have not one single XML file in your application. Oh, and you probably saw this. You don't also need an XML file. Yes, questions, very good. Yeah, that's just what I'm saying. You don't need a deployment descriptor anymore. Because what you're doing here, the JAX-RS configuration, bootstrap class, internally registered a servlet. So this was what you in the past did in the web XML, like right, deploy register servlet, so on and so forth. But with this here, it's done implicitly. So you don't have to do that. The JAX-RS implementation will know what to do. And then you don't need an XML file. You would need more stuff if you add like a more sophisticated UI, like JSF and all kind of pages. And sure, then you need some kind of configuration. But for just REST, you don't need this. Very good. More questions on that? Right. So nothing to configure for now. Yeah, let's go on with a really basic example. So now we have, oh, actually that's wrong, because I want to show you something else. We want to expose JSON via REST. And actually I want to show you a nice feature, a nice JSR, which comes with Java EE 7, which is called JSON-P, JSON API for Java API for JSON processing. And with this API, you can create JSON objects programmatically. JSON objects and JSON arrays, which is quite nice because then you don't need third-party dependencies doing this. It comes automatically shipped with your application server, and you can use it just right away. And of course, this is a Java EE project, so we probably have some kind of EJB around. We have a lot of clouds, right? So let's call this Oracle, of course. This will be, we heard beans before. Beans are very evil, apparently. So you could either do this in EJB by adding @stateless, and that's it. Or you could even leave this out. Then it's implicitly a managed dependent scoped CDI managed bean. So either you manage this via EJB or CDI. What kind of implication does that have? Well, EJB comes with some stuff already provided, like transactions, management, and interceptors, all that kind of stuff you want to use. CDI is leaner for now. CDI doesn't have some features EJB has yet that might be aligned in future specifications. Anyway, what is of interest for you? Almost nothing. There's almost no difference for the programming model. So no matter which annotation you're using here, you could add inject, what I did here, both like right away. And actually, I will show you further on in the later example, it doesn't matter if you use EJBs or CDIs for these examples here. So let's use EJBs this time. If you don't agree, we can also use CDI. Exactly, exactly. If we don't have the beans XML, then you have to like add a scope here, dependent scope, and yeah, whatever. No, my IDE fights me. Yeah, statelet has pooling and some other stuff, and that's the reason. So if you want to use this, or exactly, if you want to use it, then that's handy. If you would want to use that with CDI, you have to add further stuff. And the same is true for transactions and all that kind of thing. So if you use like JPA, this automatically starts a transaction, and you can we can rely on them, which is nice for EJBs here. But anyway, let's just do a simple method here, which will be then called from JAX-RS. This will return some clouds. Oh, and let's define the cloud. Cloud has a cloud name, and also a cloud has a hype, right? So there's currently hype going on. Some clouds are more hyped than others. Getters and setters, and just to be convenient, some constructors and 2 string methods. It's just a POJO, that's boring. So normally you would, query the database, do whatever you like here, ask some other service, some microservice, or whatever you want to have. Just for the sake of example, I will just return new objects. New cloud. We have, let's say, a database cloud, which is not that much hyped, and we have a artificial intelligence cloud, which is very hyped. All right. This is just a raise as list. Okay, help me. Sorry? Ah, yeah, thanks. That's good for having an audience. Everybody has to pay attention, because it's live coding and everything can go wrong. Oracle get clouds. So what are we doing here? That's quite boring for now. But now we can use, as I said, Java 8 features, right? And now we'll use the JSONP logic to map our POJOs, which could be from like entity beans from the database, to JSON objects. So if you want to use JSON in whatever structure you might want to use, you can use JSONP to have the full control over how this JSON looks like, right? And this is very nice. I can show you. JSON, create object builder. Who of you has used JSONP before? Okay, not quite a few. So this is how you create the objects. You have a builder pattern like API here. Create object builder creates a object builder, and you can add stuff to your JSON object. So this is empty by default, and then you can add a name, right? Get name and a hype and some other stuff. And by calling .build, you get a JSON object out of it. And obviously, we want to have a JSON array for several objects. So I called .map here to map the stream of POJOs to a stream of JSON object, which I just created inside here in the Lambda. And now, of course, we want to have a JSON array out of it. So we have to call a collector, right? Java 8. And there is no to JSON array collector, not as far as I know, so we have to call the other method, which takes a supplier and two consumers. And we can use, of course, fancy method handles, JSON create array builder, and JSON array builder add, JSON array builder add. And this gives us a JSON array builder. And by calling .build, this gives us a JSON array. And then we can just return the whole thing, and that's it. Questions? Oh, yes? You were first.
Can I just use the
Yes, you could use the, yeah, I know what you mean. The question was, can we just use the @producers annotation and then obviously return just the object? Yes, for this example, you can, because obviously it's the same name and hype. These are the two properties which are also in my Pojo. But I will show you later on if I want to modify that JSON output, then you can't, because then you have to, control your output here via JSONB, which is not there yet, or via what was JAXB in the past, or any other third-party dependency. And if you use even hypermedia together with REST, then you probably want to have more control over how your JSON looks like in terms of links and in terms of other stuff for hypermedia. And then, actually, if you're interested in that topic, on Thursday I have another talk about hypermedia REST with JAX-RS, and then you probably want to have more control, like in a programmatic way, rather than in a declarative approach. And this is for why I would consider for now that for most of the examples, you are better off using JSONP, or in fact, a programmatic approach to create them. Very good question. Yes? Yeah.
Can we somehow, is there some integration with Jackson or so?
With Jackson? No, not out of the box. So Jackson, that's exactly the point why there's a JSONB specification currently developed for Java EE 8, which wasn't there in the past. So JSONB is basically JAXB for JSON. So it's the same thing. You can declaratively create JSON mappings from Pojos, and then map them back and forth. What you could do in the past for all JSON binding implementations except the new Johnson, you could use JAXB annotations, and they will be taken into account, although it's XML. This looks like the following: XML element, and then you have name like something else. And this would work in most of the examples that you would have to test that for your application server. Of course, that's not a standard, because this is meant to be only used, well, for XML. But most of the implementations do consider this, and this can be used until JSONB is out. So this is also what I'm doing. It depends a little bit on your project. Thanks for your question. Very good question. Others on this? Otherwise, I would just carry on. So here, well, we created the output from our clouds here, and the interesting thing is the integration. So this is a new specification, JSONP, since Java E7. It wasn't there before in JAX-RS, but now you can just use it right away. And the cool thing is, JAX-RS has to know it. So when I return my JSON array object, then JAX-RS knows how to handle it. And you don't need to specify, well, JSON array what is that? And if you use a third-party dependency, whatever it looks like, then obviously JAX-RS wouldn't know about this. So this is nice that everything is like integrated. All right. And if there are no questions, I will just carry on with more stuff and more specifications. Let's create a new cloud, right? Create cloud. And now I will do another approach just to show you. Now I will actually use a Pojo here. So I will have, let's do that in a second step. Now I will have a cloud here. This, JAX-RS. This means that is the request body. So you post something. In that case, it will be JSON. I can specify that by, consumes JSON. And nicely, there is already a media type. This is application JSON. And now you require the client to post a JSON object to this resource, to that resource here. And well, it has to be a cloud, so it has to have a name and a hype. And per default, if you don't change anything, then it will take name and hype as a name. If you have more complex examples and don't want to map them into POJOs, you could also use JSON object or JSON array here and then read it programmatically. So the same way, just the other way around, like this. But just to have several examples, I will show you this approach here. If you would want to see it, you can also do the other stuff. And now I want to show another integration, bean validation. You probably know about this. I, of course, want to validate the object which comes here. So let's say there is a certain logic, what hype is, for example. So let's say hype is a number between 1 and 10, right? And this has to be validated, and name will also be validated later on. So when the client sends this, then, well, you want to automatically validate it. And you don't want to write a lot of boilerplate code, right? Like validate, and what happens if it doesn't, then please return bad request or whatever. No, just do this, and that's sufficient. If it's not validated, and this @valid annotation actually tells JAX-RS, then please validate this. Please call bean validation. And if it isn't valid, well, then return 400 bad request. And actually, that's it. And that's the nice thing, that you don't have any plumbing here for JAX-RS. The only plumbing is post. That's the method. And you don't specify, well, which status code, which whatever. You specify JSON, but that's it. And if it's not valid, then it will return 400. If it's created, then void tells us implicitly, this is shown in the spec, 2 or 4, no content. That is the status code. So actually there's more than 200, okay. And this is done automatically. So there are some kinds of conventions too, which you can rely on. And well, now let's carry on. Oracle create cloud from the cloud, right? So let's create this method. This is also void and creates a cloud, and of course prints it nicely. So a new cloud has been created, and you could do some kind of business logic, whatever. But the interesting thing is that it's automatically validated, and the validation is handled here. Well, if the validation has more than just please hype be between 1 and 10, rather than you want to have a database lookup, or you want to have more sophisticated stuff than you could do into your annotations here, right? So probably you want to validate in your business logic. Then you have, well, to have more here. So for example, cloud, not there. Cloud doesn't exist. Or let's call it cloud, not taken. This is bean validation. You can create your own constraint validation annotations. Let's do that. Cloud not taken. This is a nice already there example from IntelliJ. So what it is, it's a new annotation here. This is part of the bean validation specification. Funny words. You can specify a validator here. For example, cloud not taken validator. And this validator class is then called, and there you can do more sophisticated stuff. I can show you. And this is then called automatically, because with the @valid annotation, we specify that we want to have a validator validating all that stuff. And this @cloud not taken constraint validation tells us, well, which functionality to call to do so. And now you could do some logic here. But wait, you want to have a database access, you want to have some other business logic, right? Some more sophisticated, and you don't want to include this in your validator. So the nice stuff here is the nice story that you can use CDI to inject whatever you like. And this was the talk from the beginning. It doesn't even matter if you have an EJB or a CDI here, so our Oracle is in that case an EJB, you could add inject everything which is CDI injectable. And that is really nice because bean validation knows about CDI, or in fact in the specification it says, well, if the runtime, our application server, supports bean validation and CDI, then please also make CDI managed beans injectable in bean validation. And that in general is the really nice idea of Java EE, that you have several specifications for their own, self-contained, but you have the umbrella specification, the Java EE umbrella specification, telling you these specifications have to work together with each other nicely. And that is exactly the reason why we don't need to configure anything here. So probably for any other framework, let's take Spring for example, you would have to do some more logic. You would have to have at least one class bootstrapping that process, because obviously bean validation doesn't know about Spring at autowired, for example, which is the same thing as here with Java EE. But the nice thing at EE is that the specifications can work together. And this is really good for developers because you don't need to write everything. You just say, well, I want to have Oracle, and call Oracle here. If the username is what do we have? Cloud name is taken. Is cloud taken from the name? And then we have our nice separation of concern, so we don't have business logic in our validator rather than in the real business facade we want to call. Help me, is taken? Yes, we don't want to have it taken. So negate it, is cloud name taken, and now, well, Java equals, let's say Java is taken. Of course, you could do a database lookup here as well. And that's it. And this is our validator here. Quite simple. Let's run the example, actually. So everything I showed you was a Maven project. So we use Maven clean install. Oops, wrong folder. Maven clean install to build all that project. And the nice thing, and actually I will talk about that more in a second, is that it's really fast. And why, I'll explain later. So actually faster than I could talk. The WAR file is built, and I will deploy it on Wildfly here. You could do whatever application 7, Java E7 application servers out there. This was just a simple script which takes the WAR file from the target, deploys it into Wildfly, and starts Wildfly. Before that I always did it manually, but I'm lazy. And yeah, that's it. And now we have a running Wildfly. And actually I can show you in any REST client of your choice how that works. And I will use the command line. Actually, it doesn't matter. You can use Postman, whatever you like, but that's simple here. Localhost 8080, Java 1, resources, right? This is the base path, and we had clouds. So that's it. Let's print this. So we have two clouds, a database cloud with a low hype, and an artificial intelligence cloud with a high hype. Well, boring. The only interesting thing is how the JSON was created. I will show you more about that in a second. And now let's also create a new cloud with content type JSON and our JSON here. So we have a name, right? Cloudy cloud, let's call database. We have Java EE cloud, which is not really much hyped, right? Because it's just boring Java EE. And that's it. There was a new cloud. Let's show the header. What I told you, 201, no content. This is the default if you return void from your JUXRES method. Yeah, and that's it. If we don't have Java EE, but only Java, then this is now rejected. Bad request. Why? Because of our validator. Because I said if it's not taken, then it works. But if it is taken, in this case Java, then please reject it. Quite simple. Any questions for that? Yes?
So, for example, for validator, you Like
Yes.
if you want to show on phone that okay,
Uh-huh.
this name is taken.
Really good. You can, good, thanks for that question. The question was if we want to show our client more information here, maybe in the header, and that's actually a very good way. We did that in the past as well, to include just for debug purposes some information in the header so that you have something like this comes from Wildfly actually, but you have more sophisticated stuff like error. Well, Java is already taken, so that the developer knows why it's rejected. You can use this here. Either, now it depends what your logic is. You specify something in the annotation, like this has a default message. You could also use messaging templates. This is part of bean validation spec. It's called validation.messages or something. Please correct me. There is a default name which is then taken, and you can specify message names in that properties file. And if that is not sufficient, if you want to have more programmatic and dynamic stuff, you can use the context object, which I simply ignored here, and say build constraint violation. And now you have a builder here at the violation at the property. So actually, if you have an object, then you say which property caused the error here, name in that case, and you can do more sophisticated stuff. And that's all done in the bean validation specification. So that actually works pretty well. And the other, that is the first part, how to specify the message. The second part is if you want to, of course, include that as a HTTP header, then you can either catch an exception here, like the, or actually not here, you can't catch an exception because you're not even in that method, but you can register an exception handler for JAX-RS, for REST, and then catch the constraint validation exception. And then you can get all constraint validation exception, I think the name is, nope, violation exception. Yeah, constraint violation exception. And then you can get all this information here, which you just specified, and tell the user, okay, what actually was the problem? And that is a nice way that it integrates well with each other. And then you can say, okay, please add this as a custom HTTP header field. Very good question. We had that in the past as well, and this is how you solve them. Any other questions for this example? Okay, then let's, yes?
How can we get request context like cookies, something like that?
The request context?
Yeah, I mean, if we need to process some cookie that was passed.
Oh, you can, yeah, very good question. For JAX-RS, can we have the request context? Actually, you can add, not add inject, but with add context, you can inject from JAX-RS several JAX-RS managed objects. For example, the request even, you can inject the session, and you can inject other parameters. For example, there are request parameters. Come on. No, sorry, they're called query parameters. Query param is in, you know, the question mark param. There are header parameters. There are, I think there's a session param. How they called? No, sorry, I should know. But you can inject them as in that way. If that doesn't help, if you want to really more low-level stuff, you can also inject the HTTP servlet request in your resource class. That was the question, right? Yeah. And there are also more sophisticated things like message body readers and interceptors for JAX-RS, where I can really intercept the whole process and process it further. So if you want to add headers for all requests, for example, then an interceptor would be a nice way of do so. Thanks for the question. Any other questions? Otherwise, I will show you more integrations. Once we are at the JAX-RS side, let's continue with this. I mentioned hypermedia before, and that I think you had the question why I'm not using the default POJO mapping. So if we want to add more information for our JSON, for example, links, hypermedia. We want to link to some resource, right? With underscore self, this is just now a content type I just made up. There are actually some hypermedia content types. I will talk about that on Wednesday. For example, you want to include the URI to this resource, right? Of course, you don't want to repeat yourself all over again and concatenate the URI like I did here, localhost, Java 1 resources, clouds, because this is already on the server and the JAX-RS knows about this. So JAX-RS comes with a nice functionality which can be injected with add context as a context managed object called URI info. And the URI info can in fact be asked to create a URI with the information which is already there, which is nice. We take the get base URI builder, which gives us, well, a URI builder already containing the base URI of your application that comes from the application server. And now we can build our URIs with information from JAX-RS. For example, clouds resource. And what does this do here? This takes the value of the annotation clouds from the annotated class in this case. So actually we building a URI with the information that is already there. And the same is true with if you annotate a method. For example, if I would have a method, I will write that in a second, to give me a single cloud, then I can also create the URI for this. Let me show you. I can actually, let's write that. We are fast. This is just, we have clouds / and then a single cloud. This is just a sub-resource to give us a single object of the array we had before, right? We have a JSON object in this case, not an array, and we have a parameter here. So we want to have clouds / database, for example. And this is how JAX-RS handles that. Get single cloud by add path param. So you can also inject a parameter which is part of your URI, which changes, for example, name here. And this will be then injected in our method. This will be the cloud name or any name you like. And your URI looks as follows. So this is part of clouds / then name. And I created this to showcase that, how the URI is created. And the nice thing is, you saw the curly bracket name before, and we can substitute that variable using any parameter we provide here. So actually we can use the cloud name to substitute this .build method builds the URI from the URI builder, and all the values you provide will be taken to substitute all the available parameters. And now we have the build, and actually JSONP doesn't support URIs natively, so we have to call .toString to get a string out of that. And that's it. And this is the new logic how our JSON object is created. And actually we can just refactor this and reuse it, so we don't have to copy paste down here, because that uses the same logic to map poachers to JSON objects, right? Do you have any other questions, by the way? Just feel free to ask why I'm refactoring. Nope? Good. So we call the create cloud JSON, but actually in another way. This will not be a function, but called as a method handle. So we create the JSON out of the cloud. Oops. And that's it. So refactor this, and the same logic is taken here, not get clouds, but get a single cloud for a name. So this will, call the database, give us the cloud for that specific name, and then return the create cloud JSON. Any questions? Yes. Authentication and authorization, that's a very good question. What we have, so actually for the updated schedule for Java EE 8, there will be a security new security JSR, and also the roadmap right now is to include that in JAX-RS. So the annotation, you know, with add roles allowed will be then usable in JAX-RS. That's the nice part. Until then, you could use all kind of default authentications available for servlets, because JAX-RS is nothing else than a servlet when you look further down. And then you could use, for example, WebXML to configure that further. Either this, or actually the simple answer for that is don't use any authorization on that side. If you don't need it, do it in your proxy server upfront. Of course, if you want to access some information like username, then you would need this. You could then, what we sometimes did, add a token and pass that as an HTTP header and read it then like an encrypted token or an encrypted ID, and whatever, and so on and so forth. So for this, you would have to program it yourself for now. But actually, that's also quite simple. You could do like an interceptor, which also hooks up via CDI into the database lookup and then inject the user, or make it injectable as a principal. This is also doable by CDI producers. That's also doable. So, I mean, all the stuff I just said is one class, probably. You know, like an interceptor, one class which reads then the HTTP header and creates something out of it. We had another question in the back, or was that answered? Okay. Yep.
What would be your recommended approach for unit testing the cloud's resource class?
For unit testing?
Yes.
I wouldn't unit test this class because there is no business logic to unit test. What I would definitely test here, like in general, is having a, whatever you call it, either systems or acceptance tests, which means you deploy that thing here in an environment which is as close to production as possible, and do then fully fledged, I call them system tests, which means an external REST client or whatever client which uses your application in the same way as the production client, and then assert that the application behaves as it should be. And everything else in the outside, which you don't want to test, is mocked away. So for example, any external system you're calling. And then you have a mock server, for example, for an external system which behaves in the same way. And you can then test your application. But the interesting thing then is that your application runs in the exact same way as it runs in production. But that's a totally other topic for testing. But that's the answer for this one here, because there's no point in unit testing them. What you could do, because we have a little bit of logic here, how the JSON is created, that you say, well, you then unit test it, and that is actually true for EJBs and all kind of managed beans as well. By unit test, you just, in your test, say new clouds resource or new Oracle without any CDI stuff. That's the easy answer. So forget Achillean. Actually, that's another talk. I won't give a Java one, but for these unit tests, you don't need any Achillean or embedded stuff. You just would create that example if you would want that. Call get clouds. This is mocked away, and then you make sure that the JSON array contains all this information from the poachers you mocked. That would be the answer for unit tests, but I wouldn't do that. I would use acceptance tests, but because you should use acceptance tests anyway, and then you would easily find the typo here, which you want to test. That's the answer. You happy with the answer? Very good. We can continue the discussion. But if you would want to unit test, just create it and, well, test it. So create the instance. There was another question over there? Nope. Okay. Where was I? Was I finished with that one? Oh yeah, I want to create a new cloud for the name. New cloud. Name and a random hype. Right? So this would do a database lookup. Questions for this? Let's rerun the example. Maven clean install and Wi-Fi deploy. And in a second, I will talk more about the deployment and all kind of deployments we have. Yep, bad request for Java. Java 1. No content. Oh, actually what I wanted to show you is the other things. Let's scroll here. That's one I wanted to show, the get part. Sorry, my command line is... That's what I wanted to show, that the links are now included. And now you can see that the links contain the fully links of database and artificial intelligence in that case here, with everything I provided there, without configuration or without needing to repeat yourself. Because if I now change clouds to something else, then it still works because it just references the class which is annotated, right? And that is the nice part of JAX-RS. We're slowly running out of time even. I could show you more about, yeah, let's do that. Events, for example. So CDI comes with nice stuff to create events. You can use asynchronous things here if a new cloud was created. Let's do that in the Oracle. So create cloud, or actually we could also do that in the JAX-RS resource, however you want to do your logic there. And you know about CDI events. That is just an asynchronous way of communication without, let's call new cloud notifier, without the tightly coupling notifier, which then has, again, no annotation needed, not necessarily, on new cloud, which observes, right, a new cloud. And if somebody has used the Oracle Cloud before, then you know that this may take some time. So let's wait here. Log support park nano is the same thing as thread.sleep without the interrupted exception. And creating a new cloud, Oracle takes at least 2 seconds. And now it's created. Why I'm showing this, because here you can decouple your beans, and this of course would block for 2 seconds unless you're asynchronous. And this is one of the parts which does not work that nicely yet, because this doesn't work for CDI managed beans yet. It only works for EJBs. So you would have to have one annotation more, specifically the singleton annotation with the asynchronous, because the asynchronous is just there in the EJB package yet. This is something we want to resolve for Java EE8. But again, there's no big deal, you know. You just use these 2 annotations and then it works as well. Any more questions on that? Actually, I want to tackle more the deployment and WAR file against standalone jar things. So I will stop the live coding for this for now. That was the create example. And cloud created. Did I? Yeah, you saw it, the delay. First, you see the default task, and then this is the EJB task, which is called asynchronous, which is there for asynchronous events. Actually, I could show you more with other nice stuff from CDI, but there's a lot of stuff in CDI. The interesting thing here, just to summarize all that, is that you can use several specifications without needing to configure anything. And that is really nice for developers, because you don't want to write XML, right, like we did in the past. You just want to write business code, and that's it. So more for deployment here. So what I did the whole time, I did a Maven clean install for a WAR file, and I can show you that the WAR file here only contains our business logic. And I don't know if that surprises you, but for most of the so-called lightweight enterprise projects, this is not the case, because you're shipping, in a second, you're shipping the runtime mostly, which is not needed because we are writing business code, right? And that is all the classes I just wrote, right? And you don't want to ship anything because you're shipping it all over the time. You're currently working on a project and you're probably rebuilding it several times a day, and every time you're shipping a new, the same runtime, right? Which doesn't make sense. And the WAR files are up to 100 megabytes. No kidding, I've seen that in my own projects with, Spring or any other framework there, and that gets then either in the old way deployed to a Tomcat or a Chatty, or in a new way having Spring Boot or any other standalone jar. But the point is, it's slow, which I will show you in a second, because you always have to build these megabytes and it's not needed. This is a 9K for now. Because the thing is, you probably use a CI server, right? That CI server builds your deployment artifact, your WAR file or jar file, that gets published to a Nexus, that gets published to maybe any other staging or integration environment, and always copied back and forth. If you're using containers like Docker, you have to build your Docker. Let's do Docker in a second, which adds up quite a bit each and every time, because every time you're shipping your runtime, which is not needed. And that's the cool thing of having only the Java E7 API, which is provided, and not added to your deployment artifact. And that's everything you need on your production site. Let's do. How much time do I have left? Yeah, let's do Docker shortly. Let's Dockerize our project, which is really nice with Java E, as I just said, with small deployment artifacts. I will use a base image from myself, which is, of course, Wildfly. So this uses just the Wildfly and copies the WAR file, Java 1, here to where the Wildfly is installed. It's usually Wildfly standalone deployments, right? And that's it. I can show you the base image actually if you're interested. Which uses another base image. It only takes the Wildfly, installs it, does another fancy stuff to have a background thread, and starts the Wildfly. And this comes from another base image, which is just the LP in Linux. Why am I doing this? Docker comes with a nice copy and write file system, which only adds up the changes you make, like in Git, which is really nice for our case because the changes are only a small WAR file. You don't change the application server, you don't change the runtime, the operating system, or Java itself, and that makes it really, really fast, no matter if you're building it or shipping it. Because when you Docker push the whole thing to the Docker hub, it knows about these layers and only pushes the diff, which is in every case very fast. And well, I can show you this. So there's nothing running here, so let's build it. Java 1 for the current build, and that was, well, also quite fast, like the Maven build. So actually I can do both together. Maven build it and then Docker build it, which is, well, the Maven build takes 2.5 seconds, but that thing here is 5.5 years old. So for now, it probably would be faster. Why is it so fast? Because you don't add anything. You're just zipping your WAR file with the classes you already have, and there are just a few. You're not zipping any jar files and any megabyte of data, right? And the same thing is true for Docker. So let's run the example. Docker run Java 1, yeah, I guess, yep. And that's the same thing I just showed you for Docker. Yeah, I mean, that's boring. Questions on this? Yes?
Are you finding the container providers like WebLogic or the Oracles for keeping up with the spec? Because the loadedness is really that they have to meet the specification, right? They contain the libraries they need, which is why you're lightweight. The problem is that with the containers being so floated,
Yeah.
not keeping up with the spec, and stuff, not able to upgrade because the container has enough time to build your own with all the jars in it. The container can't. They can't keep up with the spec.
Well, the Wildfly is a certified application server in that case.
But I don't know. That I think that's part of the problem. When you say something is good, I feel like the container now has all these libraries, and then when we want to upgrade them or do something or the spec changes, we have to wait a year or two behind for the container to.
You mean with your project, you're behind the specification, or because there are available application servers for Java E7 now, and they internally make use of OSGI and Magic to only include what they needed for your application which you currently deploy, and that's why they start up so fast. And what you saw here in very old machine, 7 seconds, and this wasn't true in the past. And but this is a fully fledged application server, so this is nothing like a lightweight version. This is Java E7 as is, and the new. You are totally true for the past, but the new application servers, and no matter if you take Payara, if you take Wildfly, WebSphere, Liberty Profile, not the old one, you're really fast, and they all start up in seconds, which is really nice. So might be true, but then update to a recent one. Take any Java E7 compliant application server, ideally with Java 8 as a runtime, and then you're happy with fast deployments, if you do like WAR files without a lot of stuff there. Yeah, that's true. The certification takes some time. At least for now, all major vendors have Java E7 application servers. Fair enough. But at least the reference implementation, like Glassfish for Java E7, was very fast. So you could use Java E7 like right away when it was released, right? Just to show you another example, let's do something fun and create 100 megabyte of junk, just to show you how slow it is if you would, build the Docker with 50 or 100 megabytes each and every time. Java 1 war. Let's create 100 megabyte of random stuff and put it into a WAR file. And then Docker builds it again. And now you see how long a Docker build takes more if you have like a standalone jar, if you have a lightweight enterprise application framework which ships the whole runtime. And now finally it's done. And yeah, that's the story for Docker. And actually, that's true for all steps in your deployment and in your development pipeline. No matter if you build it, if you copy it, if you ship it together with Docker, if you copy it to any external server, you're always carrying, all the runtime there, which doesn't make sense to me. So actually, that's why I'm saying not only for the development model, what I showed you before, with all the specifications working together nicely, but also for the deployment process and for the process of building and shipping your application, Java EE is, one of the most lightweight solutions for enterprise applications. And this is the story here. One take on the standalone jars. So in the past, there has been quite a hype with also for Java EE, all the standalone runtimes like Tommy Embedded, Wildfly Swarm, and all these kind of things, shipping a jar file which includes a somewhat application server already there, plus your application, the same like Spring Boot approach. This is quite nice that we have this in Java EE just to have a choice if we need it. But as I said, I wouldn't go with that approach per default. That approach is really nice if you have some political problems in your project, that you say the ops team can't update, like you said, sir, in the back, the application server because it's too old. We have to have, our company compliant, IBM whatever certified application server, which is too old. We can't use this for other reasons. We are using this cloud vendor, which doesn't provide that, and so on and so forth. That is a workaround. I wouldn't say this is an ideal solution. For that solutions, you can add something like Wildfly Swarm. I can show you Wildfly Swarm. Actually, that's the plugin. Plugins. Wildfly Swarm plugin, and for that you also have to have a nice dependency management. So this is the Wildfly Swarm plugin here, and what it does, if you now build it, it also creates a, well, standalone jar file. And that is the reason why the build, you see, it takes now much longer, because it ships the whole, or actually a small YFly, into the jar file, which then eventually comes out and is there as a swarm jar, which obviously can be run with java-jar. Well, and that's basically the same thing as before, but now you're shipping it in your jar file. As I said, nice approach that we can choose and mix and match, but I wouldn't go with that per default. And I would consider WAR file itself as the most lightweight solution here. Any questions or comments on that? Yes?
It's actually unrelated, so we can keep on this topic if you like, but the unrelated topic that I want to cover is what about debugging? One of the pain points for me when we're doing Java EE development
Debugging?
is making changes. Like I'm stepping through the debugger and I realize I made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Make a small change. Now I want to redeploy the whole thing. My iteration. Debug, change,
yeah.
compile, and then redeploy, and test again. I'd like to make that cycle as short as possible. So any recommendations there?
What you could do, so actually what I find really well is the integration with IntelliJ, with the application server. So if you like make, how do you call it, configure the application server into IntelliJ, that you say IntelliJ run, or in any other IDE, run in the application server in the same way as you say debug on the application server. That often comes with a nice, for example, in IntelliJ, reload and redeploy classes. This works quite nice in not all of the cases, and actually that's the reason why I would go for a fast build, and that you kind of, what I did, rebuild it from scratch all the time. So what I did when I made the changes, I always did the Maven clean install, and that's not even the fastest solution, because you don't need Maven clean, you would only need Maven package, and that also can be improved if you use several threads like -t and then a lot of threads. But also just the standalone version on that old machine was quite fast, right? And this is actually the reason why I would go with that approach, that you try to make it as fast as possible from scratch. And with small WAS, this is actually possible to be that fast, though you're always doing everything from scratch, and then you don't have that problem. And all that stuff like JRebel is a nice, I would call it workaround, if you have a really slow deployment because of old application servers or whatever. But ideally, you wouldn't need this. And if you go with a fast approach, like build from scratch every time, either with that or integrate your application server in the IDE, that it does some kind of magic for you. But then you just have to pay attention. Sometimes you get weird problems, like the reloading of classes didn't work, and there's a class, yeah. Yeah. So this is why I would go with such an approach.
Okay.
But if you need further debugging really in your application, if you don't want to debug it in a unit test, because most problems you would probably see in a unit test, then I will go with that approach. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
How do you envision the future of Java EE? I mean, so far it doesn't seem a strong focus for Oracle, for instance.
The future of Java, yeah.
Of
Okay, two answers. The future of Java EE in general. I just yesterday, after all these keynotes and updates, published a blog post on my thoughts about this update. You can read it there. My comments on the last half a year with the progress or lack of progress is, I wouldn't say it's such a big problem. Why? Because Java EE 7, as you saw, is usable together with Java EE 8, Java 8 already. So it's not like we are desperately waiting for Java EE 8. It is usable right now. Of course, it is a problem that there was a lack of progress in the last year. But I would say, personally, all the discussions about the lack of progress are probably worse than the lack of progress itself, because that makes companies like being nervous, being cautious. Well, should we still use Java EE? Will it go away? And all that kind of talk. That is actually worse than the problem itself, because hopefully now after Java 1 it all will resolve and carry on again. And I totally know what you're talking about. I'm also in an expert group of JAX-RS, which kind of stalled. Yeah, of course that is a problem and annoys us quite a bit. But for you as developers, I would say this isn't or wasn't such a big problem as it was advertised as a problem. So actually the discussions and all the uncertainty, like if nothing moves, is the worst situation we have, rather than if it moves or not. Because then, you know, Oracle moves forward, or if Oracle doesn't move forward, then another vendor or the community will take over, and I'm certain they will. You know, but no progress, of course, is the worst because of the uncertainty. That is my take on that, but I wouldn't say it's a big problem. Okay. Actually, I would also want to talk about third-party dependencies. Short answer is please don't use them. You don't need any other logging framework just because to make, you know, fancy loggings. You probably don't need stuff like Apache Commons because, you know, reinventing the wheel, that's, well, yeah, unfortunately we don't have time. That's actually a nice story in just my latest project was, well, please resolve all the hundreds of Maven dependencies we have. And that's actually a really big problem, because not even the Maven dependencies, but the transitive dependencies you have. If you add dependencies, which then adds an own logging framework, or which then adds an own JSON mapping implementation in another version as the one you have on your application server, and then you have collisions, and then another version gets taken, which is incompatible, and all that kind of talk. My point is you have to be reasonable when choosing, or if choosing, third-party dependencies. For most cases, you don't need them, you know, and because, you know, you don't want to reinvent your wheel. But if you use Apache Commons just to do a usage search and you find string utils.isBlank once, and for that you add, you know, megabyte of dependencies and transitive dependencies even, which then collide with other stuff on your server, which you don't want, then you have a problem. And then you save a few lines of code, but what you get is a few days of configuring your Maven POM file and doing collisions. And actually, that was just in my latest project that you do then exclusions in your Maven POM file just to make it work again. And actually, just in the latest project I have, we had all kinds of logging frameworks I know in the deployment artifact. Log4j, Log4j2, Self4j, Logback, what else is there? I think that's it. You know, because of all kind of transitive dependencies, and you don't want that. Sometimes it makes sense. For example, I have an own pet project which uses AsciiDoctor and Git. So of course I don't want to write AsciiDoctor parser and compiler, and I don't want to write a Git integration with everything. That is then your business use case. Then it makes sense to add such dependencies. But if you don't do, well, professional logging or professional string utils is blank checking as your business use case, then you don't need these dependencies. Then just write one class or a bunch of lines of codes, and then you save a lot of pain in managing dependencies. All right. Now I really have to stop. I know. Please do me two favors before you leave. First of all, please stop calling Java EE heavyweight. And second, if when you leave the room, please use the voting machine to tell me whether you like my session or not. So thank you very much for your attention.